You're not family anymore? That's what my mother told my daughter after she flew 5 hours to be here, for them. No warning, no explanation, just a closed door and a colder voice. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just looked around at the fairy lights and champagne flutes, smiled at my brother's confusion, and walked away. 30 minutes later, my parents were panicking, guests were whispering, and something inside me finally broke. But not in the way they expected. This wasn't just payback. This was a reckoning. And it began the moment they told my daughter the same lie they once told me. The white hydrangea arch looked like it had been plucked straight out of a magazine. Everything was curated, perfectly posed, flower arrangements, soft instrumental music in the background, white chairs aligned like soldiers in formation. It was the kind of event where even the ice cubes were shaped like roses. I stood beneath that arch, straightening my dress for the 3rd time in as many minutes. Not because it needed fixing, but because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. My eyes scanned the driveway. Again. She's cutting it close, I murmured, half to myself, half to the rising panic in my chest. Alan, my husband, walked over with 2 plastic cups of pale pink punch and handed me one. Maybe the flight was delayed, he said, his voice calm but his eyes alert. He could feel it too, the quiet unravelling. Grace had messaged us when she landed. Boarded. See you soon. She'd texted alongside a selfie in her green dress, the one she'd gotten dry cleaned, paid for with tips from her campus cafe job. She'd packed a handmade frame, etched with their wedding photo, wrapped it in tissue paper and hope. She'd wanted this to be a good day. So had I. I kept glancing at my phone, willing it to buzz. Every second that passed was louder than the music. It was supposed to be a celebration. 40 years of marriage. The entire backyard transformed into a Pinterest-worthy garden party. 87 guests. Champagne on standby. A slideshow of memories queued up for the evening. And yet, I felt like I was holding my breath. I found my mother, Lorraine, near the catering table, adjusting the placement of silverware as if someone might judge her worth by fork alignment. Her signature updo looked like it hadn't moved since 1975. Dad stood beside her, clipboard in hand, looking like an executive rather than the groom. "Mum," I said, trying to sound casual, "Grace isn't here yet. Any chance we can wait a few more minutes?" She didn't look up. "She already came," she said simply, brushing invisible lint from the tablecloth. I blinked. "She what?" "She arrived around noon," she said, finally glancing at me, as if the news was no more significant than reporting the weather. I felt the world tilt. "Where is she now?" Dad stepped in, voice firm. "We told her it wasn't the right time." "The right time?" My words were barely a whisper. "She flew 5 hours. She's not really part of the family," Mum said, still smoothing the fabric like that might undo the cruelty in her voice. I froze. The world didn't go quiet. It went sharp. Every clink of a fork, every laugh in the distance felt like static against my skin. "Not part of the family," I repeated, like maybe I'd heard wrong, like maybe she'd laugh and say she was joking, but the laugh never came. "She understood," Dad added. "Didn't make a fuss, very respectful." Of course she didn't. Grace had always been like that, polite to a fault, careful, composed, the kind of girl who'd thank you for hurting her if it made things less awkward. I didn't feel my legs anymore, my grip on the punch cup tighten, knuckles white. "You turned her away," I said. "After everything, she still came and you sent her back." "It's not personal," Mum replied. "We just wanted it to be intimate." Intimate, with a guest list pushing 100. Alan appeared beside me, sensing something was wrong. He didn't speak, he just looked between us. I couldn't look at him, couldn't look at anyone. I just closed my eyes and saw Grace, standing at the edge of this backyard, holding a wrapped gift in one hand and rejection in the other. She must have looked back, wondering what she did wrong, again. The last time I felt that kind of hollow silence was when I was 12 years old. It had been a Saturday morning. I remember the sky being bright, too bright for winter. I'd woken up early, still in my pyjamas, expecting pancakes and cartoons, but the house was quiet, eerily so. No clatter of dishes, no voices, just stillness. I wandered into the kitchen, expecting someone to pop out from behind the fridge with a surprise, but no one did. A half-empty cereal box sat on the counter like a placeholder for a family that had vanished. I thought maybe they'd gone to get breakfast, maybe they'd gone for a walk. But the hours ticked by. At noon, I called my mum's cell, no answer. By 2, I was crying. They came back just before sunset, smelling like cotton candy and sunscreen. Ruth, my little sister, clutched a balloon. Colin had a giant stuffed panda. My mother, Lorraine, laughed as she set down a souvenir bag. "What happened?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from cracking. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, as if I were being dramatic. "We went to the amusement park." I blinked. "We were all going together. We talked about it for weeks." My father, Charles, offered a shrug. Plans changed. I looked at Ruth, who wouldn't meet my eyes. Colin just shrugged and headed upstairs. I wanted to scream, but all I could whisper was, "Why didn't you take me?" My mother laughed, actually laughed. "We didn't feel like you were really part of the family today." She said it so casually, like telling someone the weather forecast, as if it wasn't a knife straight through my chest. They all chuckled, Ruth included, as if it was just a silly joke. But I felt the edges of myself fray in that moment. That night, I ate a cold hot dog at the dinner table while everyone else watched a movie in the living room. I asked my mother if she meant what she said. "Oh, Olivia," she sighed. "Of course not. It was just a joke. But if you're going to make a big deal out of nothing, maybe you should think about why you're feeling so sensitive." That's when it started. The gaslighting, the minimization, the slow rewiring of my instincts until I learned to doubt my own hurt. And birthdays? They never got better. One year, Ruth got a custom cake shaped like her favourite cartoon. Colin got one with a football jersey and his name in icing. Mine? A plain sheet cake from the grocery store with the name Olive misspelled as Oliver. When I pointed it out, my mum said, "It's just cake, don't be difficult." That became the refrain of my life. Don't be difficult. Don't make a scene. Don't take everything so personally. And I believed them. I really did. For years. Until Grace. Watching her get turned away today cracked something open inside me. Something I had taped together with years of denial and excuses. Something I thought I had left behind, but trauma doesn't stay buried. It waits. And suddenly I started to remember things I had pushed so far down they barely had shape anymore. Like the time in high school when my father forgot to pick me up from debate practice and left me standing in the rain. Or the way my mum would always say, "You're nothing like your siblings," as if it were an insult, not a fact. The irony, of course, is that Charles isn't even my biological father. He married Lorraine when I was 3. My real dad vanished before my first birthday, and Lorraine rarely spoke of him. Charles adopted me legally, raised me, provided for me, but never made me feel like I belonged. I wasn't his, not really, just like Grace isn't theirs. And maybe that's why Grace's presence has always been a problem for them, because she reminds them of the parts of me they never accepted. And now, watching Grace go through what I did, being turned away, being made to feel like an outsider in her own bloodline, I understood something with terrifying clarity. They hadn't changed. They'd just found a new target. The cafe was quiet, the kind of place that smelled like old books and espresso. Grace sat by the window, both hands wrapped around a mug she probably hadn't touched in 20 minutes. Her green dress, the one she'd picked out weeks ago, was wrinkled at the waist, like she'd been sitting stiffly, trying not to cry. She looked up as we walked in, and even though she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes. "Hey," she said, her voice so calm it hurt. I rushed to her, pulled her into my arms before I could think twice. She didn't resist. Her arms wrapped around me tight, and for a second I felt her body tremble. Alan stood back with the kids, letting us have the moment. "I'm so sorry," I whispered into her hair. I had no idea." She pulled away slowly, brushing her fingers under her eyes. "It's not your fault, Mom. Don't apologize for them." "But you flew 5 hours. "I know," she said, then paused. "But I knew. I think a part of me always knew they wouldn't really let me in." I sat across from her, blinking fast to keep the tears at bay. "They never saw me as part of them," she continued. "I was always just tolerated. You could feel it, you know, even when no one said anything." Alan joined us quietly, placing a napkin in front of her like it could protect her from everything else. "They didn't deserve you," he said gently. Grace gave him a small nod. "I just didn't want it to ruin your day." "You didn't ruin anything," I told her. "They did." She looked down at her hands, fingers fidgeting with the rim of her cup. I kept thinking about when I was little," she said. "Remember that Christmas when they gave all the grandkids those big shiny gift bags?" I nodded slowly, unsure where she was going. "I got a mug," she said, "from the dollar store, with the sticker still on the bottom. And Grandma said, 'We didn't know what you liked.' I was 7. The words hit me like a punch. "I remember," I whispered. "You asked me later if you'd done something wrong." She looked up. "And you said no. You said they were just forgetful." "I lied," I said. "I know." The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was heavy, but shared. Grace let out a breath. "I used to wonder why they always looked at me like I was background noise." I blinked hard. "And when I asked you that one time, remember, in the car, after Grandma's birthday dinner?" My breath caught. "Yeah." I asked, "Why don't they like me?" And you said, "They just don't know you well enough yet." My eyes burned. "I wanted to believe you," she said, "so badly. I thought if I was nice enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, maybe one day they'd see me." My hands were trembling now. "But it never changed. And then today, it just confirmed it." A waitress came by, asked if we needed anything. Alan waved her off with a kind smile, buying us space. "I don't want to keep trying for people who don't even want me in the room," Grace said, "and I don't want you to either." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I won't," I said, "not anymore." We sat there for a while, 3 generations represented, 2 still trying to mend what one broke. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like apologizing for anything. Later that evening, after the kids had fallen asleep and Grace had gone upstairs to call a friend, Alan and I sat on the back porch with mugs of tea that had long gone cold. The silence between us was comfortable but heavy. Like we were both walking around, something neither of us had dared touch yet. "I've never seen you like that," Alan said quietly. "Like what?" He turned his head to look at me. "So still, like your body was there, but the rest of you had gone somewhere else." I stared out at the dark yard. I think I did go somewhere else, I said. Somewhere I haven't let myself visit in a long time. He didn't speak. He waited. I took a breath. Did I ever tell you about the amusement park? Alan shook his head. I was 12. They told me we were all going. We even picked the rides we wanted. But the morning came and I woke up to an empty house. They'd gone without me. He blinked. What? They didn't even leave a note, just went. Ruth had a balloon when they got back. Colin had a stuffed panda. I had a cold hot dog and a memory I couldn't scrub out for years. Alan leaned forward, his expression shifting. Why? They said I was being dramatic, that I needed to learn some humility. He didn't say anything at first, just let the words sit between us like smoke. I thought I'd buried it, I said. But today, watching Grace walk away, that same look on her face, I realised it never really left. Alan rubbed his thumb over the handle of his mug, brow furrowed. You never told me. I didn't want to seem damaged, I said. I thought if I talked about it, it would make me look weak. He turned toward me fully. Olivia, that's not weakness, that's survival. I smiled, but it was bitter. I didn't want Grace to inherit it, any of it, but she did, just by being born to me. Alan went quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. There's something I've never told you either. I looked at him. Last year, at your mum's garden party, I went to get more wine from the kitchen and I overheard her talking to one of her friends. My stomach tensed. What did she say? She said Grace was the child of Olivia's first mistake. My hand froze on my mug. She laughed after, he added quickly, like it was a joke, but she meant it. I sat there, stunned. I didn't want to tell you then, Alan said, because I didn't know if it would help or just hurt. It hurts, I admitted, voice thin, but not in the way you think. He looked confused. It doesn't hurt because she said it about Grace, I continued. It hurts because I finally understand. Understand what? I set the mug down slowly. She doesn't hate Grace. Not really, she hates me. And Grace is just an extension of me. Alan didn't argue, he didn't try to soften it. Everything she's ever done, every cold smile, every backhanded compliment, every forgotten birthday, it wasn't carelessness, it was calculated, because I was never who she wanted. And Grace? She's just the living proof of that. Alan reached for my hand. Then it's not our job to fix it. No, I agreed. It's our job to end it. He nodded, and in that moment I felt something shift. Not closure, but clarity. And that was more than enough to start. The call came the next morning, just after sunrise. My phone buzzed on the nightstand with an urgency that only family drama carries. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. Colin. I stared at it for a moment, thumb hovering over the decline button before finally swiping to answer. What the hell is wrong with you? He barked. No greeting, no breath. Good morning to you too, I said calmly, sitting up in bed. You just walked out at Mom and Dad's anniversary in front of everyone. I didn't just walk out, I replied. I walked my daughter out after she was turned away. She's being dramatic, he snapped. You know how she is. My jaw clenched. No, Colin. I know how they are. You ruined the entire event. Do you have any idea how this makes our family look? I let out a slow exhale. Since when do you care what people think of this family? Don't turn this on me. I'm not. I'm just pointing out that maybe the real problem isn't that I left. It's that I didn't stay and smile through the bullshit like I always do. You're being selfish. You've always been like this. Ever since we were kids, always the one causing problems. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was ridiculous. You mean I wasn't obedient? I didn't play the golden child role like you? You were impossible, he snapped, always picking fights, always needing attention. Or maybe I just refused to pretend everything was okay when it wasn't. There was a pause on the other end, just a second too long, enough to tell me I'd struck a nerve. You know what, Olivia? He said, voice dropping. You need help. I nodded to myself. You might be right, just not the kind you're thinking of. And then I ended the call, not angrily, just finally. Not 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Ruth. I hesitated, then answered. Hey. Her voice was soft. Are you okay? Define okay. I saw what happened yesterday. Colin said you left, and I thought I needed to hear your voice. I swallowed. Grace came. She brought a gift. They turned her away. Ruth was silent for a moment. Then she exhaled. I knew they were cold, but that's disgusting. I didn't know until after. She never even made it inside. I'm so sorry. I'm not surprised, I said, but I am done. There was another pause. Then she whispered, You're not crazy. I blinked. What? All those years you said they treated you differently. That something felt wrong. I didn't want to see it then, but you were right. My throat tightened. Why now? Because I have kids now, she said, and I saw the way Mum looked at my daughter last month, like she was a novelty, not family. I've been trying to protect Grace from all of it, but maybe the only way to protect her is to walk away. You're doing the right thing, Ruth said, even if it's hard. I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. I wish it didn't take this long. We all wish that, she said, but at least we're seeing it now. We sat in silence, two sisters finally speaking the same language after decades apart. It didn't fix anything. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing alone. Ruth was quiet for a beat, and I could tell there was more. I could hear it in her breathing, in the way her words hesitated like they were brushing against something sharp. There's something else, she finally said. I waited. Last Thanksgiving, she continued. Mum didn't know I was in the hallway. She was in the kitchen talking to Grandma. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I wasn't eavesdropping, Ruth said quickly. I was just there. I froze when I heard my name. What did she say? She paused again. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, She told Grandma, if Olivia hadn't had that child, maybe I could have forgiven her. The words hit like ice water down my spine. That child, I repeated, my voice barely there. She meant Grace, Ruth said. I stared at the floor, heartbeat loud in my ears. She said it like Grace was a consequence, Ruth continued, like your punishment for not living the life she planned for you. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My breath felt thin, shallow, like someone had knocked the air out of me. Not because of the cruelty that I'd come to expect, but because she'd said it so plainly, so easily, as if my daughter, my beautiful, thoughtful, gentle daughter, wasn't a person, but a stain. I thought about Grace sitting alone in that cafe yesterday, holding a gift she made with her hands, waiting for acceptance that would never come. And I realized with brutal clarity, my mother hadn't just hurt me. She was repeating the pattern, recreating the wound in another generation, and I had let her. I'm so sorry, Liv, Ruth said. I didn't know how to tell you. No, I whispered. Thank you for telling me. It confirms everything I was too afraid to admit. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, needing to move, needing to breathe. I poured a glass of water, but didn't drink it, just held it in my hand like an anchor. Alan came in, reading me instantly. What happened? I told him. Every word. Ruth's call. what Lorraine had said. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, his jaw tight, eyes darkening with every sentence. When I finished, he said, "We're done." And I knew he didn't mean the conversation. I nodded, because the truth had landed, heavy, final, undeniable. I had spent years trying to fit into a family that had drawn the borders long before I could walk, trying to be polite, to forgive, to explain away the jabs, the exclusions, the passive-aggressive holidays. I told myself they were just old-fashioned, just bad at expressing love. But now I saw it clearly. They didn't fail to include me. They didn't want me at all. And Grace, she wasn't collateral damage. She was a threat, proof that I had survived without them, that I had built love where they had tried to plant shame. "I'm not going back," I said, my voice steady. Not to explain, not to hear their side, not even for closure. Alan stepped closer and kissed the top of my head. Good. I felt the final string snap inside me, not a painful snap, but a release. The way a balloon breaks free and finally floats. Later that evening, Grace came downstairs. She was wearing sweatpants and one of Alan's oversized hoodies. She looked so young, so much like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. I opened my arms and she climbed in beside me on the couch without saying a word. We sat in silence for a while, the TV on low, the world still spinning outside our bubble. "I don't want to keep trying for people who don't try back," she said softly. I turned to her, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You don't have to." She looked at me, really looked. "You don't either." My throat tightened. I nodded. "Are we really done with them?" she asked. I hesitated for just a second. Then, "Yes, we are." She didn't smile, but her shoulders relaxed, and that was enough. I pulled the blanket over us both and leaned back. This wasn't how I thought our family would look, but maybe that was the point. 3 days passed before the first email arrived. The subject line was polite, final contribution request, vow renewal expenses, but the content was anything but. A spreadsheet was attached, detailed down to the last champagne flute. The total? $7,926.54, rounded up to an even $8,000 for convenience, of course, split evenly between the 3 siblings. I stared at the screen, blinking slowly, the numbers blurring. Venue rental, $3,200 catering, $2,100 live string quartet, $900 custom floral arch, $750 photo booth with props, $500 miscellaneous, napkins, signage, printed programs, $476.54. Each child was expected to contribute $2,642.19. I forwarded the email to Ruth with one line. "You seeing this?" Her reply came less than a minute later. "Tell them to bill my absence." I smiled. Then another ping, Colin, in full panic mode. "We agreed to split this. You both signed off. This is not acceptable." Another email, 30 seconds later. "I already paid the deposit. What am I supposed to do? Cover the rest myself?" A third, Mum and Dad are devastated. People are asking questions. Just pay your part and stop making this worse. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a blank email and typed, "Colin, I am not paying for an event where my daughter was publicly rejected by our parents. If you think that's acceptable, that's your reflection to live with. But I'm done pretending this is a family worth financing." I hit send. 2 minutes later, my phone rang. I didn't answer. He tried again and again. Then Ruth called, laughing so hard I could barely understand her. "He's losing his mind," she said. Sent me 4 voice notes in a row. One of them was just heavy breathing and cursing. "I got 3 emails," I said. "The man is spiraling." "He seriously thinks we'll cave, doesn't he?" "Because we always have." We fell silent. "But not this time," Ruth said. "No," I agreed, "not this time." Alan looked over at me from the other couch. "Still about the money?" "Still," I said. "Let me guess. Colin's imploding. Publicly." He nodded like it was the weather. Good, I tilted my head. You don't think I'm being too harsh? Olivia, he said gently, they turned away their granddaughter, then sent you a bill for the celebration they excluded her from. I stared at him. You're not being harsh. You're setting a boundary, finally. I let that sink in, because for years I had mistaken endurance for kindness. I thought saying yes made me loving. That absorbing pain quietly was the mark of a good daughter. But now saying no felt like the most honest thing I'd ever done. Grace walked in from the hallway, holding her phone. Did Uncle Colin just post something about us? What? She turned her screen. A vague status update. Some people just love to ruin everything, even their own family. He's fishing, I said. Should I comment? Grace asked. No, let him flail, she grinned. He's not used to losing control. Exactly, I said. Another email came through, this one from Lorraine. Short and sharp. We expected more from you. You're humiliating us. I read it twice, then hit delete. They really don't get it, I said aloud. Ruth called again later that evening. He's now threatening to take legal action, she said between giggles. Wants to sue us for emotional distress. Let him, I said. I told him if he sues me, I'll counter with a therapy bill. We both burst out laughing. And, for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt something I hadn't known I was missing. Lightness, freedom. The weight wasn't all gone, but it had shifted, redistributed, no longer solely mine to carry. It was just after noon when the message came in. A name I hadn't seen in years lit up my screen, Marla Jensen, one of my mum's oldest friends. Someone who used to babysit me when I was still small enough to believe in birthday wishes and bedtime prayers. Marla. Hey, Olivia. I know this is out of the blue, but I thought you should know. Your parents still haven't paid the funeral home for your grandfather's service. It's been 2 years. I stared at the message. 2 years. Marla continued. They used my name as a co-signer. I trusted them, and now I'm being chased for the remaining balance. I didn't want to involve you, but I thought you should know. I'm sorry. I reread it. Twice. Then I set my phone down and just sat there. Hands trembling. Mouth dry. So this was the truth. It wasn't just manipulation. It wasn't just emotional damage. It was financial deceit, too. Behind all the pearl necklaces and polished smiles, Lorraine and Charles had been hiding a house of cards. They had spent years building an image of elegance, of superiority, always dressed impeccably, always talking about their cruises, their investments, their custom upholstery. They looked like stability, like success, but it had all been smoke. And now the debt collectors were following the scent. I opened the family group chat, the one that had been dormant since the explosion at the vow renewal, and dropped the message in without comment. Just Marla's words. Her receipt. Colin responded first. Colin, what the hell is this? Ruth, you mean besides proof that our parents are professional liars? Colin, this has to be a mistake. There's no way they'd do that. I didn't respond, but Ruth did. Ruth, you keep saying that. There's no way. But haven't they already done worse? There was no reply after that. Alan walked into the room, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He handed me one and raised an eyebrow. What's going on? I showed him the message. He read it slowly, then again. Well, he said, sipping, looks like the truth is finally cashing in. I gave a hollow laugh. They've always acted like they were above everyone, I said, like generosity was their birthright, like we owed them for raising us. Alan nodded. But they couldn't even afford a funeral. I feel like I'm watching the curtain drop, I murmured, and the actors are scrambling backstage. He sat beside me. Olivia, maybe this is good. I looked at him. Good? Yeah, he said, think about it. They built their entire identity on control, image, guilt. They don't have that anymore. They're exposed. And for the first time, you don't owe them anything, not even the illusion. I let that sink in. He was right. All those years, I'd spent trying to earn something I didn't even want anymore: respect, affection, inclusion. I realize now they weren't gifts they withheld. They were illusions they sold, and I had stopped buying. I opened my messages again and replied to Marla. Thank you for telling me. I'm so sorry they dragged you into this. If they reach out again, send them my way. She replied almost immediately, thank you. And Olivia, I always thought you deserved better. I'm glad you're finally getting out. I sat back, phone in my lap, and exhaled deeply. I don't know who my parents are anymore, I said to Alan. You do, he said. You always have. You just didn't want to believe it. I looked out the window. The trees swayed gently, golden light cutting through the branches. For the first time in days, I wasn't thinking about retaliation. I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I was clear. They're going to be furious, I said. Let them, Alan replied. I smiled. Guess I won't be getting a Christmas card this year. Probably not. We clinked coffee mugs. To freedom, to truth, to being done pretending. It was almost 9 at night when the doorbell rang. Alan glanced up from his book. Expecting someone? I shook my head, already halfway to the door. Through the peephole, I saw Colin. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, shirt wrinkled, hair dishevelled, and something in his expression that reminded me of a child who just realised the monsters under the bed were real. I opened the door, but didn't step aside. Hey, he said, his voice strained. Hey. Can I come in? I paused for a second longer than necessary, then nodded. 5 minutes. He walked in like someone trying to hold himself together with invisible tape. We sat at the kitchen table. Alan stayed in the living room but kept his ears open. I didn't blame him. Colin rubbed his face with both hands. Did you know? I tilted my head. Know what? That they don't have anything, that they're broke. I didn't answer. He went on. They remortgaged the house twice. Took out loans on the car. I borrowed money from Mum's sister in Oregon. Maxed out credit cards. There's nothing left, Olivia. Nothing. I let the silence answer for me. Colin let out a bitter laugh. And the worst part? They planned to keep it hidden. Just ride it out until the three of us took over. I leaned back. So, we weren't children. We were contingency plans. They said we'd understand, he muttered. That family supports each other. That it was our duty to carry on what they built. I stared at him. Built on what? Lies? Debt? Appearances? He didn't respond. For years I thought you were the favourite, I said. That they confided in you, that you were part of something I wasn't. He looked up, eyes red. I thought I was too. I nodded slowly. Now you know how it feels. Colin's voice dropped. They lied to me, Liv, straight to my face. Welcome to the club. I thought I was helping, that all the little sacrifices were just what good sons did. I folded my arms. And what do good daughters do? Bake cookies after being told their child doesn't belong? He flinched. I didn't know. You didn't want to. That stopped him. I kept defending them because the alternative meant admitting I was wrong, he said, about them. About everything. That's what they count on, I said. Our reluctance to confront the truth. Our fear of rocking the boat. He let out a shaky breath. They're asking me for more, another loan. Are you going to give it to them? He didn't answer. You don't owe them your future, Colin, I said gently. Not after what they've taken from your past. He closed his eyes. I wanted them to be better, he whispered. I really did. So did I. We sat in silence for a moment, not as enemies, not even as siblings necessarily, but as two people standing in the wreckage of the same illusion. Finally, he stood. "I don't know what I'm going to do." "You don't have to decide tonight." He nodded. "Thanks for letting me in." I walked him to the door, and just before he stepped outside, he turned. "I'm sorry, Liv, for everything." I didn't say anything because I didn't need to. Colin was halfway down the steps when he turned back again. "There's something else," he said, voice lower now, "something I never told anyone." I leaned against the doorframe, wary but curious. "Okay." He looked away toward the street, as if bracing for impact. "When I first introduced Amanda to Mum, before we were even engaged, she smiled through the dinner, acted like everything was fine. But the next day she pulled me aside. I already knew this wasn't going to end well. She said Amanda wasn't a good fit," he said, "that she didn't reflect the family's values, that she seemed too ambitious, too independent." I blinked. "Are you serious?" "She told me if I married her, I'd be making a permanent statement about which side of the family I chose to align with." "And you still married her?" "I did, but I downplayed it, told Amanda Mum was just traditional. Tried to smooth it over, but it never went away. There was always distance, and you never said anything, because I didn't want to admit that she'd done it to me too." He let out a shaky laugh. "I spent so long thinking I was the chosen one, the trusted one. But now I'm not sure anyone was." I crossed my arms, processing his words. "Do you know how many years I spent thinking you were the enemy?" I said. "That they loved you because you were everything I wasn't?" "I thought the same about you," he admitted. "That maybe they kept you at a distance because you didn't try hard enough. That if you just complied, things would be easier. And now? Now I see it wasn't about effort, it was about control." We stood in silence, the shared realization settling between us like dust. "They pit us against each other," I said. "Kept us so busy, competing, we didn't stop to look around." He nodded. "Ruth said the same thing. She called me yesterday, said she's been replaying everything." I raised a brow. "Ruth called you?" "Yeah," he said. We talked for almost an hour. She apologized too, said she wished she'd seen it sooner." I stepped back from the door slightly, surprised. "All this time I thought I was alone in this," I said quietly, "but maybe none of us really had a place." Colin nodded. "They didn't raise children. They raised roles. You were the rebel. Ruth was the baby. I was the golden boy. And none of us ever got to be just ourselves." He rubbed the back of his neck. "We deserved better. We still do." For the first time in decades, I looked at my brother and didn't feel resentment. I felt recognition. We were survivors of the same system, just carrying different scars. He gave me a faint smile. "Guess we're not as different as we thought." "No," I agreed. "We just coped differently." As he turned to leave, I said, "Colin?" He paused. "You don't have to fix them," I said. "You just have to stop letting them break you." He nodded once. "I'm working on it." And with that, he walked into the night, leaving behind more than just silence. He left behind an illusion we'd all clung to for too long. Grace waited until dinner was almost over before sliding the envelope across the table. I glanced at it. Thick, cream-coloured paper, a Manhattan address embossed on the corner, and knew before I even opened it. "You got it," I said, breath-catching. She nodded, biting her bottom lip to hide the smile that threatened to take over her whole face. "They want me for the summer internship, full-time, paid." Alan whooped from across the table, raising his glass of water like it was champagne. "That's my girl," Grace beamed. "It's editorial, a real publishing house. I'd be working under their acquisitions team." I leaned forward, scanning the letter, pride swelling in my chest. "You earned this." "Yeah, well..." She trailed off, then looked at me. "You showed me how." I shook my head, laughing. "Me? I've never even been to New York." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You taught me something better. That no one, no matter their title, bloodline or history, gets to define my worth." My eyes stung. "You said something once," she continued, "that stuck with me." "What was that?" "Never stay where love is conditional." I smiled. "I didn't know you remembered." "I did," she said. "And I've been watching you, Mom. Every time you didn't bend, every time you said no, it gave me permission to do the same." Alan stood up to clear the dishes, giving us space. Grace watched him for a moment, then turned back to me. "I'm scared," she admitted, "but I'm also ready." I nodded. "You're allowed to be both." She exhaled. "They asked if I had family in the city. I almost said no. Then I realised I don't need to. I have people who love me no matter where I go." I stood and pulled her into a hug. "You'll never be without love, Grace. Not while I'm breathing." The next morning, I called Ruth. "You'll never guess what just happened," I said. "She got it, didn't she?" I blinked. "How did you..." "She texted me last night. Said she wanted to tell me before it went public." I laughed. "Of course she did." There was a pause. Then Ruth said, "We should celebrate." I was thinking the same thing. "Something simple," she said. "Nothing performative. Just us." And so we did. 3 days later, we packed a few baskets, filled thermoses with iced tea and lemonade, and met at a quiet park on the edge of town. No white tablecloths, no guest lists, no expectations, just a picnic. Ruth brought her husband and kids. Grace came with a tote full of homemade cookies. Alan brought a Bluetooth speaker and played a soft playlist of 90s R&B that somehow made everyone relax. We sat under the shade of an old oak tree, trading stories and laughter like currency. For a while, no one mentioned our parents. No one had to. The air was light, like it hadn't been weighed down by decades of guilt and obligation. Ruth clinked her thermos against mine. "To the survivors," she said. "To the builders," I added. We watched our kids playing frisbee in the distance, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "I used to think family was something you inherited," I said quietly. "Now I think it's something you create." Ruth nodded. "Something you protect." "Something you choose," Grace added, joining us and flopping down between us. We sat like that for a long time, no one needing to perform, no one waiting to be enough. And for the first time I realised this was family, not because of shared blood, but because of shared truth. We were halfway through our sandwiches when a familiar voice called from behind. "Olivia?" I turned and blinked. Sophie, my cousin, the one who used to braid my hair at family reunions, then suddenly stopped showing up to anything after college. She looked different. Older, of course, but also softer, like someone who had been weathered by life in all the same places. "Sophie?" I stood, surprised. "I didn't know you were in town." She shrugged, holding a tote bag against her chest. "I heard you were here. Ruth posted a photo." I glanced at Ruth, who mouthed, "Oops." Sophie stepped forward, hesitating. "Can I join?" "Of course," I said without thinking. "Always." She sat down slowly, her eyes scanning the group, then landing on Grace, who offered a gentle smile. For a few minutes, no one said much. We passed her a plate, poured her some lemonade, let her settle in, then she spoke. "I almost didn't come," she said, voice shaking. It felt like crashing something sacred. "You're not crashing," I said. "You're family." She let out a bitter laugh. "That's funny, because I've spent the last decade wondering if I ever was." The table went still. Sophie looked at her lap. "Do you remember my sister's wedding?" I nodded. "Barely. I wasn't invited." "Neither was I," she said. "I showed up with a gift. Thought it was just a mistake. Thought someone forgot to mail me the invite." She swallowed. "But my mum pulled me aside before I could even say hello. Told me it was a private event and that it'd be better if I left. Said I made people uncomfortable." My heart dropped. "I went back to my car and cried for 20 minutes, she continued. "And then I left the state the next week. Haven't been back since." No one spoke. Not because we didn't have words, but because we had too many. Sophie looked up, tears brimming. "I thought it was just me. I thought I'd done something to deserve it." "You didn't," I said. Ruth reached over and took her hand. "None of us did," Sophie nodded. "I've been following your story, Olivia, quietly, reading what you posted, what Grace shared, and I realised I'm not the only one. I'm not crazy." "No," I said. "You're not?" She wiped her cheek. "They make you believe love has to be earned. But the rules change every time you get close, and when you finally stop trying, they call you selfish." I felt something click in my chest. It wasn't just us. It had never been just us. For years, our family had spun a web of unspoken rules, of exclusions dressed as traditions, and we had all at some point fallen into the same trap, believing the fault was ours. But now, sitting on a picnic blanket under a tree with Sophie crying beside me, I saw it for what it was, a cycle, and we were breaking it. "I used to think I had to fight them," I said aloud, "to expose them, to prove how wrong they were." Grace looked up. "But now I think I just had to stop participating." Everyone nodded. Because sometimes resistance isn't loud. Sometimes it's walking away. Sometimes it's saying no. Sometimes it's building your own table in the park and letting the outsiders know they were never the problem. 3 years later, my voice crackled through a microphone set up in the corner of my sunlit office. Welcome back to The Chosen Few, a podcast for anyone who's ever been told they didn't belong, I said. Today, I want to talk about family, not the kind you're born into, the kind you find. The intro music faded, and I leaned back, glancing at the script I barely needed anymore. I didn't start this podcast out of anger. I started it because I wanted a place for the unchosen, the uninvited, the ones who stood outside the house looking in. I wanted them to know they weren't alone, and each week, when I told another story, mine or a listener's, I felt the shame peel away from our collective skin, layer by layer. This week's episode was about building instead of begging. I told them about the picnic, about Grace's internship, about the day I realised survival wasn't enough if it meant staying small to fit someone else's mould. After I signed off, I closed my laptop and stepped into the living room. The sun was pouring through the window, casting shadows of wind-chimed leaves across the floor. Grace had sent me a photo that morning, her and 3 friends at a rooftop brunch, all smiles and oversized sunglasses. She looked radiant, self-assured, not a trace of the girl who once waited on a cafe bench for people who never intended to open the door. She had never once brought it up again. Not the rejection, not the vow renewal, not even the emails that followed. It wasn't because she forgot, it was because she healed. She'd learned much earlier than I ever did that freedom isn't found in someone else's apology, it's found in your own permission to stop hoping for it. I made tea, sat by the window and smiled at the view. Our neighbourhood was quiet, cozy, the kind of place where people waved when they drove by, even if they didn't know your name. 2 doors down, Ruth was unpacking a box on her porch. She had moved in 6 months ago. I want my kids to grow up where truth isn't treated like betrayal, she said when she signed the lease. I want them near people who know how to love without a contract. We called it the Survivor's Village, half jokingly. But it stuck. It wasn't just us anymore. Sophie visited often. Colin sent updates, less frazzled than before. Even Amanda, his wife, had reached out to thank me. He's softer now, she said. Still intense, but less afraid of being seen. There was no dramatic reunion, no family healing retreat, no weepy group therapy session, just space, boundaries, rebuilding. Ruth waved from her porch and I waved back. I never imagined this life, a podcast, a healed daughter, a sister next door. It wasn't loud or grand, but it was ours. I opened Grace's message again, smiling at her caption. They asked who taught me confidence. I said, my mum taught me how to walk away. I typed back, and you taught me how not to look back, because that's what she had done, and what I had finally learned. You can spend your life waiting for people to see your worth. Or you can stop asking and start living. I chose the latter, and for once, choosing myself didn't feel selfish. It felt sacred. It arrived in a plain envelope with no return address. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Colin's. Neat, restrained, always in capital letters. I almost didn't open it. For a full minute, I just stared at it on the kitchen counter, letting the kettle scream on the stove behind me. When I finally slit the top, 3 pages fell out. Handwritten, double-sided. I didn't start from the beginning. I skimmed. Olivia, I've been thinking about everything, about the vow renewal, about grace, about what you must have felt, what I didn't let myself feel for years. He went on, tracing back to childhood, to the way our mother divided us, to the small slights, the big silences, the ways we all learned to shrink. He recounted the moment at the picnic when Ruth and I laughed like survivors instead of soldiers. He wrote about shame, regret, about how hard it was to admit he'd been wrong. I paused halfway through the 2nd page, not because I was angry, but because I didn't need more. I folded the letter neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and slid it into a drawer I rarely opened. I didn't tell Alan about it until the next morning. He was packing Grace's favourite snacks into a care box we were mailing to New York. He glanced at me, raisin box in hand, and said, "Going to reply?" I shook my head. "No." "Want to talk about it?" "Not really." He nodded, sealing the box. "Fair enough." There was nothing left to say. I wasn't holding a grudge. I wasn't punishing him. I simply didn't need closure from someone still catching up to the life I'd already built. Later that day, I sat down to record another episode of my podcast. The theme this time, the final door. I clicked record. Sometimes the last goodbye isn't loud, I said into the mic. It isn't dramatic or teary. Sometimes it's just quiet, a drawer that doesn't open again, a letter you choose not to finish reading. I paused. For years I waited for certain words, for apologies, acknowledgements, explanations. I used to think that healing required them. But now I understand that healing isn't about getting the right ending. It's about building a new beginning without asking for permission. Grace called that evening, giddy with news about a freelance writing gig she'd landed. She didn't ask about family, didn't bring up the past. Her world was expanding, not shrinking, and I refused to be the tether pulling her back. Ruth stopped by with muffins the next morning. We drank coffee on the porch, and talked about everything but them. Sophie texted me photos of her and her new girlfriend at a community retreat for women estranged from family. They looked radiant, arms looped, cheeks flushed with freedom. The village was thriving. And me? I was done chasing people who only ever turned away. I no longer needed their recognition, because I had my own. As I sat at my desk that night, watching the sun set behind the trees, I thought about all the versions of me who had begged for a seat at a table that had been rigged from the start. I whispered something aloud, not to anyone in particular, maybe just to myself. They told me I wasn't family. I paused. They were right. I smiled softly, the words rolling over me like warm wind. I'm not part of that family. I turned to look at the framed photo on the shelf, Grace, Alan, Ruth, and me. All of us laughing mid-bite at a cookout last summer, blurry and beautiful. I built a new one. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough.